hierarchies. I think you discussed this a little bit, right, Morris?
No, I didn't do offhand.
Okay, so I'll give you kind of at a high level. Here's kind of the high level idea of what is the basic high level hope for payment channels. So the story that you want to look at is Alice and Bob, and they want to exchange payments between themselves, and they want to do 10,000 payments between them. So that's kind of their goal, right? They want to do a lot of payments between them. And so, you know, the trivial thing to do is that each time you want to do a payment, you do this on the main chain. And so, you know, we've seen this might be expensive. Sorry, it might take time because I might need to wait 10 minutes till the block appears. And it might be expensive because there's this miner that actually wants to get tips. So he wants to be paid. And yeah, so this is kind of seemingly inefficient. So the question is kind of, can we do an alternative version? And so what's the alternative version of kind of doing this payment scheme? Well, we'll have 3 phases, just like every good thing in life. So the first will be a setup phase. And in the setup phase, we'll basically lock some resources, some money, so that we can then interact with this money. So imagine that we're taking some resources, some money, and we're locking them into the system. And we'll discuss how that's locked later on. And once they're locked, now Alice and Bob can do this communication, these 10,000 transactions between them privately. So they're not doing this on-chain. They're just doing this between them. Okay? They're just exchanging messages between them. And at the end of their exchange, there is some balance. Maybe, you know, Alice has at the end $900 and Bob has let's say $100. Let's say they split $1,000 between them. And so at the end of this transaction, there's a close phase. In this close phase, they basically close this channel and unlock the resources and inform the main chain how this split occurred. So again, this is kind of the idea. There's a setup phase where we lock resources. Then there's a phase where we can interact very quickly just between us, between Bob. And then we close this channel and tell the main chain how the split should happen. So that's the high-level idea and hope. And so if you've been in the database transactions world, then you know this would be very similar to a very, very simple version of a linear two-phase commit. And you know, if you read Jim Gray's survey from 1978, he calls this idea of linear two-phase commit folklore. So this is something, I guess, that the database people have been looking at for many, many years. And you know, this is the following thing. There are 2 entities here. There's a main chain and a small chain. And you're just doing a transaction between them. And the way you do this transaction is that the main chain locks resources and sends control to the small chain. The small chain does its transactions. And once the small chain wants to end the transaction, it commits locally and then sends the transaction back to the main chain to unlock. Okay, so this is kind of the high level from a transaction processing view. This is just, you know, a linear two-phase commit. All right, so we're going to do a little bit more detail into it. So it's not clear you can do that, right? So if we can talk, it might be cheap talk. So if we talk, it's not clear that you can commit to actually paying. So what we'd like to do is that our discussion is somehow binding. Yeah, so we'll discuss. So I didn't say how we're going to do it, but obviously one of the things that we're worried about is what if you try to cheat me in the closing phase? Because, you know, maybe, you know, I paid you a lot of money and now I want to cheat you, right? And so yeah, what we want to make sure is that cheating is not going to be useful here. So that's our goal. And so this is kind of the high-level goal for payment channels. And you know, what's the advantage here? So the advantage here is that we get a lot of scalability. On the one hand, because you can do a lot of these payments off-chain, and you know, maybe also privacy, because what you learn at the end is just what the beginning state and what the end state is, but you don't see all the things in the middle. So for example, maybe, you know, you open a payment channel with your supermarket, you put $100 there, and nobody sees, you know, while you're buying things, nobody sees anything. Just everybody sees at the end of the month, maybe they see you spent $40 on groceries. Maybe that's not so bad in terms of privacy. Maybe it is. So, okay, so what I want to focus now is kind of a more abstract version of that and talk about blockchains with reduced properties, because I guess the way I want to think about this is there's kind of this big blockchain of everybody, and then these 2 people, Alice and Bob, they actually implement a small blockchain between them. And so this is going to be this view that has blockchain with reduced properties. And so, in a standard model, we assume that there's kind of an adversary that controls a small fraction of the voting power. But here what we want is kind of something much weaker. We'd like to have a small group, maybe 2 people. And what we want is kind of a reduced notion of liveness and safety. And we want to do this with 2 players. And so what we have is this property that I'll call a weak blockchain, or weak guarantees in terms of fault tolerance. And the properties are going to be following. So liveness is going to be guaranteed only if the 2 parties are honest. Okay? So if both of us want to continue work, then we will continue working. But if one of us wants to stop work on the channel, then this channel loses liveness. Okay? So this channel kind of has very weak type of liveness. And it also has a kind of a weak type of safety. So the weak type of safety is that if there's one honest person there, then this thing is safe. If all are malicious, then we lose anything. We lose kind of our properties. So that's kind of the properties. And this generalizes to f+1 parties in general. So it doesn't have to think about 2. So you can have kind of a general channel. So you can think about this as a state machine replication for weak blockchains. And here's how we're going to do it. So every round, all these f+1 parties get together and agree on what is the next block. Okay, so they're doing a very simple, trivial Byzantine fault-tolerant protocol, which is we all agree what's the next block, all f+1 of us. Okay, so if we want to decide that the next block is I pay Gilad 2 cents, then we both agree on that. And if the next block is I pay Gilad another 5 cents, we both agree on that. So every time there's a transaction, we both agree. But since it's just 2 people, it's easy to agree. Okay, let's say we both sign on it. So this is kind of the idea and a very simple Byzantine agreement protocol. And what are the properties? Again, so the properties are there is progress in this channel if everybody is honest and makes progress. If even one person decides not to do anything, then there's no progress in this channel. Okay? And the second is that you get safety because if one player records this thing and he's honest, then he has a valid signature of everybody else saying we authorize this block. Okay? So if one guy is honest, then he maintains this state. And so I guess the whole idea here is that when we close this channel, this one honest guy will report what happened in this chain. That's kind of the intuition. Now the problem is that what the adversary can do is the adversary can actually report some sort of older version of this chain. Okay, so maybe if I pay Gilad over, let's say, the month $1,000, what I can do when I close the chain is I can try to report an earlier version, maybe the version where I just paid the first 3 cents. Okay. The thing is that Gilad is online. He saw all the signatures of all the rounds of the execution. So really what we need to do is we need to make sure that we do the unlocking phase reasonable and correct way. And this obviously is going to rely on synchrony because kind of we have this 2-phase commit going in the back. And the way we're going to do locking is we're going to kind of lose a lot in terms of timeouts. In order to and potentially lose safety. And so the way we're going to do it is when somebody wants to close a channel, it just provides to the kind of channel management a valid state of the weak blockchain. So again, there's kind of a chain of things that are happening in there, and you just provide a state. And so what do we know? We know this is a valid state that happened sometime in the past. The only thing we don't know, because it's signed by everybody that's in the state, the only thing that we don't know is whether this state is actually the last one or not. And so kind of the mechanism here is that we just wait. And how long do we wait? That's a good question. People suggest 2 weeks or 2 hours or any number in between or more or less, but you have to wait some amount. And if somebody provides a more recent value, then we want to punish the offender that provided a late value. Okay, this is the high-level idea of a payment channel. This is kind of the one trick that you need to remember from payment channels. So again, the idea is if somebody wants to close a channel, it sends, here's the latest state, and then there's a waiting period where if in this way, just like in FOMO 3D, if somebody in this 24 hours publishes kind of a newer version, it basically means that you lied. If he publishes the same version, it means that we all agree, and then we can close this channel. Another question?
Does that mean that to punish the offender must have some stake in the game, some collateral that they put beforehand?
Yeah, so if you remember, the idea was that we lock resources at the beginning of this thing. And all of the things that happen inside this channel are on the locked resources. And so, yes. And so in a sense, I didn't mention how to punish because there's many suggestions of how to. So for example, in Lightning, you erase all the other guys' resources and so on. But you can decide, build your own punishment scheme.
So isn't actually punishing like dangerous? Because if you think about how we agree on what is the last state. So if I send you money and we want to agree that I did this, then I sign this transaction, and you sign this transaction, but you never give me your signature.
Yes.
Then you know the last state, and I can never settle.
Yes.
Because you can always.
Yes. Yeah. So we can we can make sure that the agreement protocol is such that we both agree that there's no more steps, right?
How do we do that?
So the problem is kind of the last step. So this is kind of an agreement step. So you need to do, I cheat a little bit. You need to have an agreement algorithm. So basically, if you know it's committed, then this is kind of the last step. Okay. So there's the only disagreement can be kind of maybe the last one step between us. Okay. So you need to do a slightly more. If you need to do this, you need to do a slightly more complicated protocol. So I cheated in one round here.
How do you know that the states that given subjects they are valid?
So inside this chain, inside this small blockchain, you want to make sure that you're only working on the resources that are locked in the main chain.
But I may say that I gave you 1,000 bucks for it.
Yeah, so let's say you first lock. Remember, the first thing that you do is that you lock $100, let's say, inside this contract that controls this chain. Now, inside in the communication, you can't say I'm paying you 1,000 because you only have 100. So I will reject that message. But if you say you paid 80, then I can take that and show that signed message to the contract that's governing this chain, this channel, and that will close this channel by giving me 80 out of your 100. Yeah, it's an example of a state channel.
Can you exchange with outside world the things that were acquired in the blockchain, in the weak blockchain? You gave me money,
Okay.
and so I would like now to go somewhere and exchange that Bitcoin or whatever you need for real money. How does it work? Normally, right, I can go and use my cryptocurrency to...
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but there are discussions about, let's say, derivative markets where I can basically take this discussion that we had, and instead of putting it on chain, I can give it to somebody else that will keep it. Yeah, and this will be kind of maybe a third party or somebody that maybe part of the services that they provide is closing this channel. And there's kind of a market for that. Okay, so I guess what I want to do is I want to say that this is not just a state channel, but this is kind of a generic version of what you can do for off-chain. You can think about it not just as off-chain, but also as a sharding scheme. So this channel doesn't have to be kind of an F+1 scheme. It can be any type of Byzantine fault-tolerant system. And so this is kind of the high-level approach of saying that we'll have this layer 1. This layer 1 will be a main chain. And maybe underneath that, we'll build channels. But instead of building channels for 2 people, we'll actually build like fault-tolerant, robust channels. Maybe 3F+1 type channels. And so here's like one example. We'll build like 100 sharded BFT systems. And so the idea here is that we'll basically take resources. We'll do the same thing we did with the payment channel. But now this main channel is, instead of pushing it into a channel that contains Alice and Bob, it will push these resources into a channel that has a BFT engine by itself. And so we have a main channel, and this main channel is now pushing resources into 100 smaller BFT channels. And what you can do is this channel not only, so instead of having this channel close, stop and close, what this channel can do is, let's say every period, let's say every hour, it can kind of do a checkpointing where it records the current hash or the current states. So you can think about it as if it's closing and restarting every hour. And this layer 2 system can then spawn layer 3 channels and so on. So you can have like a nice hierarchy of these BFT engines. And again, this is part of the Ethereum 2.0 vision of sharding and how to do these things. So in a sense, on the one hand, it's called off-chain, but actually it's not really off-chain. It's just that one chain is calling other chains, and maybe these other chains are locking resources with other chains.
What's the advantage of the system with BFT subsystems compared to Lightning, where communication is one-to-one, but we have this routing algorithm that brings us all together in this uniform layer 2? So how do these two approaches compare?
So the use case is different. So Lightning is kind of, I guess in here, maybe a layer 3 approach where two people pay. And in layer 2, you still have maybe the guarantees you wanted in layer 1, but now you split this world into 100 different worlds. So presumably, you get better throughput because you sharded your world. So you maybe...
Complexity of inter-shard communication.
Yeah, so I'm not saying this is I'm not saying this is the best thing in the world. I'm just saying this is an example of people's thought about this.
Would it be fair to say that this system would be more suited for more complex contracts, whereas Lightning is better for just simple payments between two parties?
No, I guess my point in the slide is I want you to think about a hierarchy, and I want you to think about you can put anything in this hierarchy. It can be channels between two players. It can be channels between F+1 players. It can be channels that contain a Byzantine fault-tolerant engine by itself. And it doesn't have to be a one-level hierarchy. It can be a multi-level hierarchy. So this is an example of somebody who does that. I'm not saying what's the best thing to do, but it's just an example. Yeah, so sharding is a horrible thing because now your decentralized trust now is split 100x. So there are risks here, and there are similar risks to this idea of these. So yeah, anytime you move to a smaller group, then you need to have, remember, one honest in each group, right? Like in the previous schemes. So if you split into too many groups and your groups are completely malicious, then you have a problem. So safety does not maintain if you have a group that has only bad guys. You had to have at least one bad guy, and at least one good guy. And in some of these schemes, if you're actually running a BFT system, then you have to have a third or a half honest people. So now you even have a harder time. So maintaining safety here is non-trivial.
Can the different shards, the malicious shards in layer 3 affect something beneath it? Like the underlying...
No, so above it can, but beneath it, yeah. So
that is like an interesting...
Yeah, so the direction is good, yeah. So in a sense, the way I think about this is that you start with a high fault tolerant scheme and you delegate to a slightly lower fault tolerant scheme, and you can delegate onwards and onward to slightly lower fault tolerance. That's the correct direction. Okay, so I guess in the time remaining, I want to kind of go over a completely different topic because it was written in my thing that I should talk about future directions. So I'm going to talk about one thing that I'd like to learn more about and has recently kind of become very discussed in this world, and this is kind of this idea of randomness as a public good offering. And as you know, randomness is a very important resource, a very important resource to have, and some people call it like a public good. It's something that the state or the world should provide humanity, randomness. And randomness, why is it important? Because randomness gives us fairness, and fairness helps us have a fairer world. And what about? Yeah, and I guess fairness can help with scalability because if things are fair, then maybe we can spread things more evenly around and maybe trust smaller committees, right? So this is part of the idea here is that if we manage to choose a good random representation of our group, then and it's going to be a fair representation, then this will allow this small group to work on behalf of the big group, and that will provide us with scalability. Okay, so how hard is public randomness? I mean, come on, can't we just ask our prime minister to give us good public randomness, and just work with that? It has to be good. And so again, the problem here is that it's all about who you trust, and do you trust one person not, and you want to decentralize the trust of who's generating these random bits. Because if I'm generating these random bits, then I'm going to generate really, really good random bits. But maybe I'm going to make sure that these bits are really good, not just for you, but maybe better for me. Okay, so I'm now going to do kind of a how do you generate random bits? I have till? One. Okay, good. Okay, no problem. So how do you generate random bits? So here's kind of a straw man simple version of how would you generate random bits. So let's say there's a group of us and we want to generate a randomness together. So each one of us is going to contribute a little bit of randomness, and together we'll get some good randomness. So what we'll do is the following. So every player is going to choose randomness, and he's going to commit to this randomness. Let's say the way we commit is we take a cryptographic hash function, we compute the value, and we send this to everybody. So we publicly announce, here's my commitment of this random value. Okay, that's round one of the protocol. And in round two of this protocol, what we do is we reveal, each one of the players reveals their randomness. And we verify that this randomness equals the thing that they committed on the previous round. And so in round two randomness equals the one in round one. And then let's say we take the XOR of all this randomness, and that's our new randomness. Okay, so that's the scheme. The algorithm is simple, right? It's clear. So the first question is this random? Yeah. Not for the public? If? Yeah. So the answer is you have to have one honest guy. Okay, so one honest guy. This is pretty good, right? So it's like everybody here is trying to, we're playing poker and you're all playing against me, and maybe you're all colluding against me. And so at least if I send some randomness, then we all XOR the randomness of everybody, then it's going to be fine. Yes.
Actually, not at all, because you can just copy the randomness from all the honest guys, cancel them out, and pick whatever you want. Yeah, but you can copy the commitment, and then it source out.
I think you really committed. So let's say maybe I didn't prescribe this correctly, but you commit with your public key, and it's clear who you are. There's identities and so on. Yeah. So I'm.
By committing using a hash.
Yeah. So there's not an anonymous. So.
No, you can choose exactly the same
Yeah.
thing.
Anyway, so this is just showing you that even designing like a simple protocol for for randomness is requires to work in a distributed setting. And the first thing you ask yourself if you're kind of in this world of distributed algorithms is, what property about this protocol? Liveness. Yeah, so is this live? And so, do we get termination? And yeah, so, even if one guy withholds information, then we're kind of, at least the way I described this, we're kind of stuck in this protocol. What can we fix that protocol? Slash. Okay, before there's still before deposits. Yeah, we can slash. That's so we can basically say somehow make you commit and make you say that if you don't open this commitment, we will force you to pay. Setting there. Yeah, so one round. That's the time limit. I tell you, if one round you don't sign, then Oh yeah. So what you can do exactly? You can do is ignore the withholders. That's the suggestion. That's the one I wanted. So yeah, we'll talk about slashing in the next one. But I guess ignoring the withholders, the problem here is. Yeah. So now now it's not purely random, because suppose that everybody committed and I'm the last guy. Now I can choose whether I withhold or I don't withhold. So if I don't withhold, then we get some randomness. If I do withhold, maybe I lose my stake, but there's a randomness going to change. So now I can manipulate this randomness, and maybe it's a public good. So maybe I'm willing to pay this loss of stake because I'm getting a bigger stake for lunch later on. So this is the problem with withholding. So what can we do kind of to improve these types of schemes? Collaborative. Collaborative signing. Yes, so we can kind of somehow force people to reveal their secret even if they don't want to. Threshold, Multi-party computation, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, secret sharing. So all the same thing. So we do a threshold scheme, secret sharing scheme, a way to kind of force others to reveal their secret. So basically, instead of sending a commitment, we'll do kind of a verifiable secret sharing scheme, which is kind of the fancy name of saying that if all the good guys decide to open your secret, then your secret is open. So we force you, instead of saying that we ask you please open in round 2, we actually force you to open. And the problem here is that this needs an honest majority to recover. So kind of the schemes with the secret sharing, that's kind of the best we can offer in this scheme. And so the question that I have here is, that's good, but remember, I'm playing poker against all of you guys. And when I get a really good hand, then one of you is going to withhold and cheat, and then I'm going to lose. So the other scheme is you say, well, don't worry, Ittai, we'll play poker with you, but we'll use a threshold scheme, so none of us can withhold. But maybe all of you are colluding against me. I'm this old measly poker player, and so I'd like to get some sort of better randomness against all of you. Good. I like impossibility. Yes.
Actually, don't think it's impossible. You could use verifiable delay functions.
Okay. Good. Other? Okay. Yeah. So this is what we're going to talk about. Is kind of this going back to Bitcoin and what are the revolutions in Bitcoin? I mentioned this yesterday. So really, one of the revolutions is it's an algorithm that uses the idea of mildly hard cryptographic puzzles. Right? That's kind of one of the big things that if you say as an algorithm, what does it do different? Where it doesn't use only NP-complete problems or only discrete log and so on. It actually also uses mildly hard cryptographic puzzles, which is an interesting new twist. We haven't seen a lot of algorithms that do that. So what are it's basically find a hash, and finding a hash with many zeros. So it's something that's hard to compute but easy to verify, because if I tell you here's something that if you hash it you get lots of zeros, you can just hash it and see it gets a lot of zeros. So what is a mildly hard cryptographic puzzle? It's one that's hard to compute and easy to verify. And originally it appeared for spam protection. This is Dwork and Naor, and Adam Beck had kind of improvements that didn't use a trapdoor for it. And the main use is for proof of work blockchains in order to elect a leader. This is kind of the main use. What a main use? The amount of electricity proportional to Denmark to solve mildly hard cryptographic puzzles. And so the question is, what other types of uses or puzzles can we deal with? And here's kind of the thought here, and this is related to generating randomness, is, what if we could commit to a value, and instead of saying that we need a threshold to reveal to it, what if we could somehow commit it using a mildly hard cryptographic puzzle, so that on the one hand, you won't be able to see what I committed to immediately, but if you spend an hour working on it, you can open my commitment. Okay, so imagine you had kind of this scheme. So previously, remember, we had a scheme where you committed, and then you are the only one that can open it, right? Well, essentially, it's cryptographic. It's computationally infeasible for anybody else to open it. So here we want to build instead of that, this trick of a mildly hard cryptographic puzzle, where when I'm committing, it's not that nobody can break my commitment and discover what I committed to. It's just that it takes an hour to break into it and discover what I committed to. So that's kind of the high-level idea, to use mildly hard cryptographic puzzles to break into it. And so here's kind of the idea. So we choose randomness, and now instead of committing, we'll choose this mildly hard, I don't know why there's a C here, cryptographic puzzle R. And then in the second round, what we'll do is we'll reveal R and maybe the proof. So maybe this is kind of the way for you to check this puzzle. And we check that R is valid, and we XOR all of it. And then maybe in round 3, what we'll have is if somebody did not reveal, so somebody withheld, that was the problem we had earlier. Now what we'll do is we'll solve this cryptographic puzzle, mildly hard cryptographic puzzle, in order to open the commitment. Okay, so that's the 3-round scheme that we'll use. And so the hope is that if we do that, we might be able to circumvent some sort of lower bounds. Oh yeah. So and so now the next thing what we want, well, depending on 9 minutes, yeah. So I'll show. So now the thing that we want to do is kind of make sure that. So what do we want to do? We want to make sure that this mildly hard cryptographic puzzle, when I publish it in round 1, if the adversary is really fast, he might be able to break it already in round 1. So if this is kind of a rushing adversary, so he hears in the beginning of round 1 what happens and tries to break it, and by let's say 0.90% of round 1, he broke it, and now he can fix his randomness once he knows my randomness, right? And that's bad. So I don't want the adversary to be able to solve things faster than I can. Now the problem is that with hashes, that's actually pretty hard because my laptop can find hashes in a rate which is way slower than what a big mining rig can do. Right? So there's a huge inequalities, and the reason of these inequalities is that you can have you can spend a lot of money and buy a lot of CPU, and it's inherently parallel. And so really what we want to do is we want to create some sort of puzzle that is not inherently parallelizable, in the sense that if my adversary buys a lot of machines, he can't solve this puzzle faster than I can.
Could we just use another hash functions, memory hard hash functions, which is sometimes called ASIC resistance, but basically the same proof of work structure?
Yeah, so we'll use something similar to that, which is this verifiable delay function. But yeah, there are definitely connections between that. Okay, so this is the opposite of finding zeros in a hash. Zeros in a hash is kind of something that's inherently super parallelizable. The more machines, they can just work in parallel on it. And here we'd like to find something that's much more sequential. And so this has been something that's just been formalized in the last half year, and there are candidate solutions, and it's not clear what will eventually work and will not work. So I'm just kind of giving you a glimpse into this nice new world, because again, I think it's related to blockchain's kind of contribution of using mildly hard cryptographic puzzles, and it shows you kind of a new twist on these things, a new thing you can do with them. And so here's kind of a specific scheme. So this is this idea of a delay function. So we'll choose a randomness, and now we'll commit to this randomness using this commit scheme. But this commit scheme, actually, if you spend effort, can be opened. And in round R, in round 2, we will reveal R, and we'll also reveal this proof. And we check that this proof is valid, and we also, then we XOR all the things together. But if somebody did not open this, did not reveal in round 2 his randomness, then we will actually solve the puzzle. And since he made a commitment here, then maybe in an hour we will open up this commitment and figure out what his randomness was. So let's assume that anything, it commits to something. But you're right, it has to. Yeah, so it has to commit to something. We need.
And whatever, and anything, any value.
Yeah.
In the range.
Yeah. And so this is what we need. We need this idea that if you have the commitment, then in time capital T. So think about capital T as 1 hour. So in 1 hour, you can actually open this commitment. And this is kind of the property. If you have the proof, then you don't need to spend capital T time. You can spend log T time. So think of log T as 1 minute. Okay, so if you give me the proof, I can verify it in 1 minute. If you don't give me a proof, I'll work on it and figure it out in 1 hour. And I guess, from a theoretical perspective, what we want is that this is an inherently sequential process, which basically means that if my adversary has, many processors, and you can, again, parameterize this, many, then he still cannot open this commitment in time 1 minus epsilon times capital T. Okay, so if he wants to solve this problem, it has to take him an hour. If he wants to solve it in, let's say, 50 minutes, then even if he buys a lot of machines, he can't do it. That's the property.
Generate random groups and then verify them.
Well, these are properties that we want. I haven't told you how we get them, but that's what we would like to get.
Don't it assume some sort of unique algorithm visualize our works into specific sequential.
Yeah, yes, of course, yes. I'll discuss a little bit about that. So yeah, so in lack of time, so I'll kind of go relatively quickly. So here's a scheme, a very nice scheme by Walensky, published just a few months ago, and which is kind of making a lot of interest. So people are looking at it. So I guess both Dan Bonnet's group and the Ethereum people. So this is kind of based on the RSA modulus, where you take two primes and multiply them, and that's kind of your modulus. And really, the idea here is the following. This is the commitment scheme. You take your randomness, you hash it, and then you raise it to a large power, which is 2 to the t. Okay, so how would you create this large power? So if you knew the secrets to this RSA modulus, then you could do it quite quickly. You could actually compute 2 to the t mod phi, and from that you could easily compute this thing. But we're assuming that you don't know the secret key you don't know how the decomposition of n is to p and q. And so if you don't know, then the only thing you can do is do t repeated squarings. So you take h of r, you compute the square of that, you take that, you compute the square of that, you take that, you compute the square of that, you do that t times. So this is kind of the most efficient way that we know, that humanity knows, to compute this number. And know that it's inherently sequential. Right? In order to kind of compute the 5th squaring, I need to know what the 4th squaring is. I can't prepare the 5th squaring without knowing what the 4th squaring is. In order to compute the millionth squaring, I have to know what the millionth minus 1 squaring is. So that's kind of the scheme. If we had time, I will tell you how you do the proof. It's kind of a nice interactive proof. And then you kind of uninteract it. And and then basically you use this scheme. And there are still challenges, because you need to create public parameters in order to build this RSA modulus that we all agree on. And you need to build some special ASICs so that it will kind of be a fair game, that everybody will have the same speed. And the nice thing is that this is innovation is also seemingly helping in other things, and is kind of related to these depth robust graphs and proof of storage. So this is again related. So I guess my plan was that if we had time, we'll have more fun and kind of look online together, or are we decentralized yet? But I see we're running out of time. There's 2 more minutes. I'd like to thank you and stop here.
What would you say to the idea that even with VDS, we're kind of fighting with economics here, because if we build systems that hold lots of value using VDS, there will be a huge incentive to develop some kind of specialized ASICs or very large-scale farms. Or, I mean, mathematically, it can be the case that with the secret it's fast, without the secret it's slow. But if economics come into play and there are very large amounts of money on the line.
Yeah, no. So the idea is that there's kind of a limit. So there's a few tens of millions of dollars need to be spent here. And once you build the ASIC, then there's no way we know how to speed this up.
I mean, how do we prove that there will not be more efficient ASICs with lots of money invested?
Yeah, so how do we prove that we can't break elliptic curves, and how do we prove, we don't know how to prove that these things are impossible.
No, but this is a different question. This is efficiency of hardware.
Yeah, so you're right. So the thesis of this scheme is that there is some well-defined limit of what ASICs can do and how they can behave in terms of repeated squarings. Now, you're completely right that if somebody comes in and says, I can, using an ASIC or some other hardware, be able to do repeated squarings 10 times faster, then I can kind of break this approach.
But is it the same idea that Zcash, which uses memory card equihash hash functions, but then when enough money comes into the game, Bitmain produces ASICs?
Yeah, so I think this is, the reason it might be different is this is a relatively simple, repeated squaring. It's like a very simple operation, and it's not clear how you could improve it. It's a fixed scheme that you need to do, right? It's like you can just encode it in ASIC, but other than that, what else can you improve? It's not clear. It's just like improving SHA-256. What can you do? You implement an ASIC. After that, what do you do? You can build a lot of them in parallel. That shouldn't help you. So parallelism will not help you. So running one circuit, there's nothing smart you can do.
You also have physical limitations to how fast the operation can happen, literally physical limits. So you can only go as far.
Yeah, I mean, look,
standard hardest assumptions with
Yeah, I'm not saying this is not going to be broken in half a year or in 2 months or next week. I'm just kind of giving you, I got the opportunity to tell you about future directions, so I decided, to tell you about something that's happening now, new, and which I recommend you to follow because I think it's fascinating and it's related to, I guess, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because it's using these mildly hard cryptographic puzzles. And this is already affecting questions in complexity. And for example, there are now schemes that are looking at building cryptographic schemes out of NP-hard problems using ideas that came out of this type of research. Right.